Hello everybody, and welcome to your lecture about managing stress. So in today's lecture, you will learn to know and understand key stress management techniques that are being used when a person feels under stress. Secondly, you will learn what post-traumatic stress disorder is and what the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder are. This lecture relates to chapter 13 of your textbook. So although I'm highlighting some components of the textbook and adding something towards it during this lecture, make sure that you also read your textbook because there will be information in the textbook that I'm not covering in today's lecture. So let's start today's lecture off with some information from the previous lecture, which is what is stress? As you may recall, there were two different ways of looking at stress. The first one is seeing stress as a stimulus. So for example, you may be walking through the woods and you see a bear. Then the bear would be the stress stimulus. Also, catastrophic or major life events, such as injuries, for example, can also be seen as stress. The second way of looking at stress is looking at stress as an experience or part of a transaction process. In this example, stress is an internal state of being that is an outcome result based on the stressor that you have seen. There are two different types of stress in accordance with this theory, which is eustress, which is positive stress, and distress, which is negative stress. I also wanted to quickly remind you of this transactional model of stress. And particularly, I want to draw your attention to the appraisal process. Because a lot of the stress management techniques that we'll be speaking about in this particular lecture will focus on this appraisal process. So recall from previous lectures that the appraisal process is the process in which you start to think about what the implications of the stressor are to you. So is the situation a challenge or a threat? That will determine how stressed you are going to feel. This can be a primary appraisal or a secondary appraisal. I've previously walked you through the entire model, so make sure that you remember that. But for now, it's important to understand that appraisal process, that cognitive process between being presented with a stressor, then thinking about it, which is the appraisal, and then you have the outcome behavior. That's in short how the stress process works. And that appraisal process is key in stress management training. So stress management training is based on the premises that stress is an outcome of both being presented with a stressor and your cognitive appraisal process. Now, in cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT as an abbreviation, changes in cognitive schematas can be used in order to help people deal with stressful situations better. So a cognitive schema, which is the singular version of a cognitive schemata, is an unconscious belief that you carry about the world. So to give you an example, everybody has their own sort of underlying thoughts about how the world works. And this informs the way that you think, it informs the way how you react to certain situations. And there are some cognitive schemata that are associated with increased levels of stress in people. So there are many cognitive schemata, but to today's lecture, the four that I show on this particular slide are the ones that are of particular relevance. So the first cognitive schemata that's particularly relevant when it comes to stress management training is catastrophic thinking. So an example of catastrophic thinking is, I messed up at work. This means that I will lose my job. This means that I will lose my house. This means that I'll have to live on the street. How will I feed myself? How will I feed my children? So that's an example of catastrophic thinking. The second cognitive schemata that is associated with increased stress levels is overgeneralization. So an example of that is, I failed my exam. That must mean that I'm too stupid to go to university. The third cognitive schemata that's related to higher levels of stress is arbitrary inference. So an example of that would be, oh, I've had a headache for 2 days. This must mean that I have a brain tumor. And the final cognitive schemata is selective abstraction. So in that case, you would be thinking about an event and you overemphasize something negative about the event. So for example, maybe you have gone hiking and during hiking you got quite sore feet. If you use selective abstraction, your thought may then be, well, hiking wasn't too bad, but I got really sore feet. This will prevent me from ever going hiking again. So within cognitive behavioral therapy, what therapists would do is actually try to change the way how people think. So they would like to change cognitive schemata, and that's definitely possible within cognitive behavioral therapy. So when we're talking about stress management training and using cognitive behavioral therapy to change cognitive schemata, really what we're talking about is changing, for example, catastrophic thinking. So that people don't think, oh, I messed up at work, this will mean that I'll become homeless. No, it would mean that people would think, I messed up at work, that's okay, I can make this right, I'll just try to fix my mistake. Which obviously relates to a completely different response than to panicking and thinking that you may become homeless. Although this cognitive behavioral therapy to change cognitive schemata really works, there are some critiques about this. And the main critique is that cognitive behavioral therapy really focuses on the way how people cope with stress. So they are presented with a stressor, and it's about how people then try and deal with that stressor. What it doesn't include is whether we actually should change the environment that people are in. So for example, you may be an employee working for a verbally abusive boss, meaning that the boss may yell at you, for example, when you make a mistake. Now, of course, you can use cognitive behavioral therapy strategies in order to make sure that you are affected less by the yelling of your boss and you're better able to cope with your boss yelling at you. But the question is whether that is actually the most appropriate way of dealing with the problem. Perhaps it would be better to try and change the behavior of the boss so that he isn't verbally abusive to you as well as to other employees. So cognitive behavioral therapy is all about changing how people cope with stress. But sometimes you may want to change the stressor or changing the triggers of stress. So Eden in 1998 started to talk about problem-focused counseling, which focuses on changing triggers. So it's not about changing people's thoughts and schemata to cope with stress, but it's about changing the triggers to stress. So for example, there may be a person who gets very stressed by having to drive through work to work through peak hour traffic. Of course, we could then try and help the person cope with driving through peak hour traffic. However, we could also discuss with the client whether it would be possible for them to start their work a little earlier, thus avoiding peak hour traffic. So within this problem-focused counseling, there are 3 different steps to take. The first is problem exploration and clarification. So what is actually the trigger to stress? In this example, it would be peak hour traffic. The second would be goal setting. What trigger does the individual want to change? The individual doesn't want to drive to work through peak hour traffic. And the third step would be facilitating action. How can we change this trigger to stress? So one example could be, well, you could leave for work an hour earlier, and then you don't have to drive through peak hour traffic. Or you could move house. Or maybe you could work from home. What is valuable in that particular situation? So this is not actually a therapy-based approach. So you may notice that previously we talked about cognitive behavioral therapy and therapists. This is a counseling approach. And you try to fix the problem together with your client. There are also other ways of trying to manage stress in your life. And this can be accomplished by relaxation training. So relaxation skills are skills that are best learned through 3 phases. First of all, learning basic relaxation skills, so learning actually how to relax. Then monitoring tension in your daily life, trying to figure out at what moments in time you feel most tense or stressed, and at what moments in time you feel less tense or stressed. And then finally being able to combine those first 2 steps in order to use relaxation at times when you actually need it. There are different types of relaxation techniques that people can use. So the first type is the mind-to-body type, where basically you're using your brain in order to relax your body. The other type is the body-to-mind type, where you're using your body in order to relax your brain. Both have a similar outcome in that they both reduce stress levels in people. However, it has been proposed that when your stress is cognitive, so when the stress is associated with your thoughts, it may be better to work on mind-to-body techniques, where you try to relax your thoughts to relax your body. Well, if the stress is somatic, so for example, you may feel queasy when you're stressed, or you may start sweating a lot when you're stressed, then it's probably best to use somatic relaxation training techniques that relax the body and therefore relax the mind. So that's 2 ways of working with this. Now I'll provide you some examples of relaxation training over the next couple of slides. Probably the most well-known relaxation technique is deep breathing exercises. So within deep breathing exercises, there are 3 steps that you would have to take. First, you would have to fill the lower levels of the lungs, and you can see the picture on the right-hand side. The second step would be to fill the middle level of the lungs, and finally, you would fill the upper level of your lungs. Which means that first you would breathe so that your belly goes out, then the second step would be slightly raising the rib cage, filling the middle part of the lungs, and to fill the upper level of the lungs, it's about slightly raising your chest and shoulders. When people start to feel stress, usually they will take more breaths per minute, and also they tend to hold their breath for a while, which then causes a somatic or physical reaction in the body that actually starts to make you feel more stressed. So a way to try and use deep breathing in order to reduce stress levels is diaphragmatic breathing. You can pretty much already deduce from the picture what this is about. So you see a person laying down and they're breathing, trying to raise their belly and drop their belly when breathing. So what you can see on the right-hand side is a sort of transcript of what you would say to a person when trying to achieve diaphragmatic breathing, which would be put one hand on your upper chest and one on your belly, just above your waist. Breathe in slowly through your nose. You should be able to feel the hand on your belly moving out. The hand on your chest shouldn't move. Breathe out slowly through your pursed lips. You should be able to feel the hand on your belly moving in as you exhale. With the client, you would slowly talk them through this and repeat this at the correct times when people should be breathing in or breathing out. You can find a lot of deep breathing or diaphragmatic breathing exercises on, for example, YouTube. Or maybe you have a smartwatch and you'll probably notice that you're able to download some relaxation, deep breathing exercises on your smartwatch as well. Feel free to give it a go. It could be really interesting to take a look at how you can use deep breathing to reduce your heart rate, for example, which is an indicator of stress. So feel free to give that a go in your own time. Of course, be aware the first couple of times when you do deep breathing exercises, it may not work because you're not skilled enough yet. So it's something that takes practice, which is why it's called relaxation training, because you need to train it. Another way of using your muscle to relax your mind is deep muscle relaxation or progressive muscle relaxation. So in progressive muscle relaxation, we would take people through a script in which we would ask them to tense muscles and then release them. And the relaxation is achieved by making people aware of the difference between the feeling of tension and relaxation. Now, we wouldn't just ask people to randomly tense the muscles and relax them. No, there's a strategy behind it. So you would either have to go from the top of the body to the bottom of the body, meaning start with the head and finish with the toes, or you would go the other way around, starting with the toes and finishing with the head. There's no real significant differences in which way works best. For some reason, I prefer to start with the head and finish with the toes. So an example of a deep muscle relaxation script would be to ask people to sit down in a chair or lay down on the ground. Ask them to close their eyes and take a couple of deep breaths in and out. After that, you would say, I would like you to raise your eyebrows as high as you possibly can. Higher, even higher still. And release. Feel that difference between tension and relaxation. Now try to smile as wide as you possibly can. Wider, even wider still. And release. Next, I want you to raise your shoulders as high as you possibly can. Try to reach your ears with your shoulders. Raise them higher. Higher still. And release. Feel the difference between tension and relaxation. You would do that with every part of the body, so you would then tense the back muscles, the biceps, the forearms, clench the fists, clench the core, the glutes, the upper legs, lower legs, curl the toes under the feet. All of that. Afterwards, you would ask the client to tense every muscle in their body as tight as they possibly can, hold it for a little bit and release. And this will make the client aware of the difference between tension and relaxation and will make them feel heavy and relaxed. So that's what deep muscle relaxation or progressive muscle relaxation is all about. So these were two examples of body-to-mind techniques for relaxation. The next example is a mind-to-body technique for relaxation. And it's called mindfulness. You may have already heard of it. It's widely popular at the moment. So if you're not aware of what mindfulness is, it's a method of relaxation that focuses on people's thoughts. And it's about being aware of the thoughts and worries that you have, but then deciding to disengage from it and to focus on the here and now. And it's quite well explained in the picture on this particular slide, in which you see a person walking a dog, and you see that the person is worried about all of the things this person has going on in their lives. Well, the dog is very mindful and is just thinking about what he's actually doing, which is having a walk, looking at the trees and the sun. So in this example, the dog is quite mindful, while the person is not. And for this person to achieve mindfulness, they would have to ignore all of these thoughts and worries that they have at the moment and go back to just focusing on the walk the person is having with the dog. If you want to try out some mindfulness skills, I highly encourage you to take a look at one of these YouTube videos. I won't play them because I know that the sound quality will be awful if I play them right now. Feel free to copy-paste the YouTube links into your browser and let's either take Jon Kabat-Zinn or Mark Williams take you through some mindfulness exercises. So mindfulness originally stems from a Buddhist meditation approach and has later become also very popular in Western societies. Over the past 20 years or so, there actually wasn't a lot of evidence supporting that mindfulness can be useful when people are feeling particularly stressed. So although it was popular, we didn't actually know whether it worked. Lucky for you, in the past 5 years or so, people have really started looking into this and came up with evidence that supported mindfulness. So take a look at this research paper. So this research paper is a systematic review, as you can see, which means that it looked at all sorts of research papers. And it looked at whether mindfulness training affected the stress and well-being of parents of children with autism spectrum disorder. So it can be quite stressful for parents to have a child with autism spectrum disorder, just because it requires more care, as well as that people worry about the future of their children, what they will be able to do, what they won't be able to do. It causes to some parents quite a bit of stress. Because of this, there have been several researchers looking into whether teaching parents how to use mindfulness techniques can help them cope with the stress that they experience, as well as whether it elevates their levels of well-being. If you look at the abstract, and particularly at the bottom of the abstract, it shows that the research thus far has been quite positive. Particularly, it says that mindfulness-based interventions potentially have long-term positive effects on stress levels and psychological well-being of parents of children with autism spectrum disorder. In other words, it seems that the results of getting mindfulness training as a parent of a child with autism spectrum disorder can not only help you in the short term, but it can help you manage stress in the long term as well. What it says completely at the bottom of this abstract is that future research is needed to develop a cost and time-effective intervention aimed at maximizing efficacy of current interventions in children with autism spectrum disorder and their parents. So it's about involving the children as well and making sure that the benefits outweigh the costs of the intervention. Now, I found another research article which comes from the Journal of Nursing Economics, and they actually looked at the cost effectiveness of mindfulness training in a group of breast cancer survivors. So you may have already read in your textbook in chapter 13 that mindfulness can be used to reduce stress in cancer patients. This takes it one step further by looking at the cost effectiveness of such programs. And what you can see in the executive summary, if you look at the last point, it says that the program appears to provide significantly improved health-related quality of life at a comparatively low cost. So that means that a lot of other methods to reduce stress and increase quality of life of breast cancer survivors are a whole lot more expensive than a mindfulness training program. Which of course again speaks to the benefits of creating evidence-based mindfulness stress reduction programs. So this, combined with a whole lot of other research that's out there that I won't show you in this presentation, brings a brings together quite a strong argument that mindfulness training can be very useful when dealing with stress. On the extreme end of stress, I want you to be aware of post-traumatic stress disorder, or in short, PTSD. Post-traumatic stress disorder is a disorder obviously related to extremely high levels of stress. And in Australia, about 4.4% of the population suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder. So that's about 1 million people in Australia in any given year that suffer from PTSD. Now, PTSD results from events that cause a real threat to a person. So these events can be, for example, being in a car accident. As a result of the event, there should be an immediate, very strong stress response. And in order to be diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, there should also be long-term symptoms that I will come back to later. Research on post-traumatic stress disorder has shown that there are some professions in which people are particularly prone to developing post-traumatic stress disorder. Probably doesn't come much to a surprise, the pictures that I now put on the screen, which are a picture of a fireman, a picture of people in the military, and a picture of people who work in emergency services on an ambulance. Why isn't this a particular surprise? Because all these people are, for their jobs, involved in quite a few events that cause a real threat to them, to their lives, to the lives of others around them. Another example that's maybe a little bit less common is, for example, surviving cancer. So cancer is also a real threat to a person. You can, or you are getting seriously hurt, and there is a chance that you may die from cancer. So people get really scared, hoping that they are not going to die from cancer. So this is the immediate stress response that can cause the long-term response as well. So what are the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder? So the first symptom is reliving the traumatic event as if it were happening again. So having flashbacks of what happened. The second is having nightmares. Quite often nightmares about the event, but it could also be nightmares about other things. Symptom is avoiding places, activity, or people that remind you of the traumatic event. Another symptom is negative feelings about yourself or other people. An inability to experience positive emotions. Irritability, angry outbursts, or aggressive behavior. Also always being on guard for danger, hyperarousal, so that you're easily triggered into that fear state again. So an example of this you hear quite often when people talk about people from the military who suffer from PTSD. When there, for example, is thunder, so the weather is bad, people from the military can be particularly triggered because it reminds them of the time they spend in a war zone, where that similar type of noise could be related to a bomb going off. Trouble concentrating is another symptom of post-traumatic stress disorder, as well as having trouble sleeping. And as you can probably understand, that having trouble sleeping is also related to the nightmares. So post-traumatic stress disorder is a real clinical psychological disorder, and if you notice these symptoms in someone you may know, then make sure that you refer them through to a general practitioner or a qualified, accredited clinical psychologist, so that these people can be helped with their symptoms. One thing that people may want to try and do when a specific traumatizing event has taken place is try to debrief. However, research has shown that debriefing on an event may make things worse for people than not debriefing on the traumatic event. So it increases the likelihood of post-traumatic stress disorder. Why? Because secondary traumatization could occur. People are basically living through the traumatizing event again, just to debrief about the event. Also, debriefing may medicalize normal distress. Of course, when you are in a very stressful situation, so for example, you witnessed a car accident in which someone unfortunately passed away, of course you are going to feel upset. Debriefing may make you feel that this is a medical condition that you're feeling upset. Well, actually, otherwise you would feel that it is a normal response. And as a result, you will not develop psychological symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Also, debriefing may prevent potentially protective responses of denial and distancing that may occur in the immediate aftermath of a traumatic event. So as human beings, we have a lot of protective mechanisms built into our brains that prevent us from some events to affect us too much, which is distancing and not humanizing people who got hurt. That's a self-protective mechanism. And sometimes, although it may seem a little bit odd, the self-protective mechanism is quite important to protect yourself from developing further psychological issues when witnessing an extreme event. This is also the reason why in the military, for example, if there's a strong war zone, soldiers are encouraged not to think about people, for example, that they shoot as people. They're being taught to think about them as animals or things rather than as people. Why? Because the psychological impact is less. That being said, humanizing is very important to create empathy. So having this kind of mindset while walking through the streets on your daily walk to university, then it is much more beneficial to think about the people around you as people rather than as things. So you may now wonder, do stress management techniques also help when working with extreme cases such as people who suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder? There has been some research in this area as well. And this paper that I'm showing on the slide seems to indicate that yes, stress management techniques do help also in cases of post-traumatic stress disorder. So this particular research article is about war veterans who suffer with post-traumatic stress disorder. And they are assigned to two different types of groups within a research project. A group of people who were receiving treatment and a group of people who were put on a waiting list. The people who received treatment were taught a specific type of yoga that focuses on deep breathing as well. And what the research showed was that the people who received the treatment, so the active group, had significant reductions in post-traumatic stress disorder scores. They had less anxiety symptoms. They had a lower respiration rate, while the control group did not. So in other words, the control group didn't change. But the veterans who were taught that specific type of yoga that focuses on deep breathing showed that it seemed to work, and that all indicators of stress seemed to be lower in the treatment group than the non-treatment group. There were also reductions in hyperarousal symptoms immediately after the intervention, as well as 1 year after follow-up. So this means that there may be a clinical utility for that specific type of yoga for people with post-traumatic stress disorder. That being said, it's important to note that if someone is suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, it's not enough to say to them, oh, I'll just do yoga. That's not how it works. In these groups of war veterans, people also receive additional care. It's just that adding this yoga on top of it seemed to have benefits to the war veterans in this sample. But it's not good saying that doing yoga when someone suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder will cure their post-traumatic stress disorder. That's not at all true, so please keep that in mind. So let's apply this information to a fairly recent case you may remember from the news, which is the Thai soccer team that got stuck in a cave. I'm sure you remember the story where a team of young soccer players and their coach wandered into a cave. Then it started raining and lots of water in the cave, and the boys as well as their coach couldn't leave the cage anymore. They were in the cave for quite a while until they got rescued by divers, Navy SEAL divers. So they were in the cave for weeks, and then they got rescued. How would you feel when you were trapped in a cave for weeks, not knowing whether or not you're going to get rescued because you don't have any contact with the outside world? Well, likely you would feel stressed. Seems plausible. What was interesting about the information that came out about this particular case is first of all the observation that all the boys and their coach were quite calm. No one was crying or screaming, and according to the people who were there, it was quite astonishing. Now later they found a reason as to why this may have been the case, because their coach used to be a Buddhist monk who was trained in meditation, and we know that Buddhist monks also do mindfulness exercises. And according to multiple news sources, this coach actually taught the boys to meditate in the cave, to keep them calm, so as a relaxation strategy, and to preserve their energy during their 2-week ordeal being stuck in the cave. So this provides some, or is it very anecdotal, evidence that meditation could be very useful in stressful situations. Now that you've already learned about PTSD, you may wonder, is it likely that these boys will develop PTSD after being rescued from the cave? What do you think? Well, there have been some experts thinking about this. What the experts had to say was the following. So of course you remember that events that cause PTSD are sudden events and unexpected events in which people fear that their lives are being threatened. These are often distinct moments of intense panic. And it may well be that the boys were quite panicked when they figured out that they couldn't leave the cave because the cave was underwater. However, what was argued as well is that it's conceivable that the most frightening time for the boys was actually not the time when they were stuck in the cave. Because they may not have known exactly how much time had passed because it was dark in the cave. They may have thought that they will soon get rescued, that people may just drill a hole in the cave and that they will be able to walk out of the cave fairly easily. We don't really know what their thoughts were while they were in the cave. We don't know if that intense fear had taken place. And based on that, some experts argue that it's conceivable that the most frightening time for the boys actually was learning that one of the Navy SEALs that was there to rescue them had passed away trying to rescue the boys, or trying to set up the rescue for the boys. Because that probably gave them a very real experience of exactly how threatening how life-threatening the situation was that they were in, which may be, and this is just conjecture, which may not have been the case when they were in the cave. So in the cave they may not have known exactly how life-threatening the situation was, and learning about a Navy SEAL diver dying may have made it that much more real for them. And that can also cause an intense moment of fear, which can relate to the development of PTSD. And there's actually some research showing, for example, that children who have been rescued from natural disasters didn't develop any symptoms of PTSD while they were in evacuation. But then after, when they got to go home and saw exactly what had been going on, so for example, seeing a car and a tree and seeing the house completely non-existent, that was the moment when symptoms of PTSD came, as opposed to the moment when they were in actual physical danger and were rescued. Another thing you may want to consider is that now there's talks about creating a movie about the boys who were in a cave, and there's Hollywood who wants to create it, as well as the Thai government wants to have a say in it. Anyway, what you may start to think about now is that the creation of the movie will cause a debrief, because they would have to talk about what it was like to be in the cave, and they would have to recall all of the things that were going on while they were in the cave. And as you have just learned, this could potentially also be a trigger of PTSD. So take that into consideration when thinking about other examples that may be related to PTSD. So hopefully by now you have a better understanding of what some relaxation techniques are that you can apply to reduce levels of stress. And these relaxation techniques can be used in many different situations. So it could be work related, it could be exam related, it could be sport related as well. And hopefully you now have an idea as to what PTSD is and what some of the symptoms and triggers of PTSD can be. So thank you very much for listening, everybody, and you'll hear from me again in the next lecture.